All right, we began the story of Joseph last week. What do you remember about Joseph? What we talked about last?
I don't know, I wasn't here. Sorry, Ronnie, I had to say that.
It's all right.
His different trials.
Yeah, his young life, different trials. He was a favorite son, favorite child, not liked by his brothers, loved very much by his mom and dad, treated differently by his brothers. We got all the way to him being thrown in the pit and sold to the Midianites or Ishmaelites, depending on your translation. So today we're going to pick up where he is over Potiphar's house and resisting temptation. He does a great job at modeling for us.
What's the script, which verse?
We'll get there.
39.
Yeah, it's
39.
Genesis. I'm going to take Simon's word for it because it's not on my first page of notes here. I do want to give you a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his book called Temptation. He says, "In our members there is a slumbering inclination towards desire which is both sudden and fierce. With irresistible power, desire seizes mastery over the flesh." That's pretty strong. I'm not sure how, I thought about that a lot. It almost sounds like we don't have a choice.
Very hard.
And of course, yes, that's a good way of putting it. It's a very difficult choice, but we do have a choice, don't we?
Not too many people can resist.
And that's right. And there is not a person on planet Earth that reaches a certain age other than Jesus Christ who has been successful at every temptation. He's the only one.
And 1 Corinthians 10:13 says there's no temptation beyond what we are able to stand, but he provides a way to escape.
Yes, there's always a way out. Always. The trouble is, temptation wears a lot of faces. There are different kinds of temptations. There is material temptation, the lust for things. That's stronger with some people than others. There is personal temptation, which is more along the lines of, I need to be known, I need to have power, I need whatever. There is sensual temptation, the lust for another person. Joseph engages in battle with this third category. We're going to limit our thoughts to this one this morning as we continue to think about Bonhoeffer's statement. He goes on to say, the powers of clear discrimination and of decision are taken from us. I don't know, I struggle with that. Well, I want you to be thinking about it, but before we look at his temptation, you have to see exactly what's been happening to Joseph to get him in this position. It's a great story. So let's go back a little bit, get some setting here. Jacob had accepted the fact that his son Joseph was dead. Why does he think his son is dead?
Because they tore up the coat of many colors and stained it with goat's blood and took it to the father and said, "This is your son's blood."
Okay. And where is Joseph in reality?
In the pit and sold into Egypt.
Okay.
Egypt by now, isn't he?
Genesis 39:1, that's what we're going to go with. Joseph has been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. So Joseph finds himself in a country and in a culture that he doesn't know, in a language he doesn't know. At least I assume he doesn't know the language. That's a drastic change from how he grew up. Favorite son is treated differently than a slave in another country, right? Drastic difference. He is worse than being thrown in a pit by his brothers, I would think, though that's not very good. This is his life from now on as far as he can see. And as he's introduced to his circumstances in Egypt, I want you to notice two things that are absent. One is there's no mention of time. We don't know how long he has been this what do we say? Item that's been sold on the auction block. We don't know how long from that until Potiphar's house. There's just no way of knowing.
He must be an adult because that
Yep, he must be an adult by now.
woman wants him.
Yes. We just don't have any concept of how long time has passed. Could have been 2 years, 2 months. 2 days. We don't know. I doubt 2 days. Secondly, nothing is said about the adjustments that he has had to make. He has had to adapt from favorite son to the pit, to being on the auction block, to being a slave, rising up to be the second in command of the country. We don't know how many adjustments he's had to make. Now, we do know God has blessed him tremendously in the process.
We do know that he also spoke the native language, because when his brothers finally come to him, he's speaking in that language and not in his native language.
Okay? Maybe he had to learn it. Don't know. Maybe he already knew it. I don't know. But we do read that he is sold to a man named Potiphar, who is what? What's his position?
He was the captain of the guard.
Captain of the guard or captain of the bodyguard, depending on your translation. What is that?
They protected Pharaoh.
It is much like
The Secret Service.
the Secret Service or an elite group of
Military people.
men. Yeah, they're courageous, they're elite, they are the best of the best. In fact, Alfred Edersheim in his work says Potiphar is the chief of the executioners. That would be scary. You're his slave. Chief of the executioners. Now, God is involved in Joseph's life every moment. God is guiding him. He has guided him to the point where he's found favor in Potiphar's eyes. Joseph doesn't have to tell Potiphar that God is with him. Verse 3. His master saw that the Lord was with him. He doesn't have to tell him. He can see it.
How do you see it?
Great question. How do you see that God is with you?
If you're an example, people are going to notice.
If you're an example, people will notice.
Your lifestyle is a big part of that. Your character, your lifestyle.
Okay.
Who you are inwardly reflects who you are outwardly.
Yeah. He is just different. I mean, God has blessed him and everything he touches is right. It's done well. It's as if he is just, you can tell luck is not this good.
He's calm.
He's calm. He's a man of faith. He is courageous. I mean, he's like David standing before Goliath. Not this last Sunday's David, the week before's David. Joseph has faith in God, and it's recognizable. You can see it. So he gains trust quickly. But with trust comes responsibility. And with responsibility comes vulnerability. And that's what happens. He rises to this position. He has a lot of responsibility. When you have a lot of responsibility, you're going to have people that don't like you. And when you have people that don't like you, what are they going to do?
Make life hard.
Make life hard for you, try to bring you down. And Joseph is prospering. Potiphar has left everything in his charge. It says, in fact, he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. That's the only thing Potiphar had to deal with, his food. Joseph was in charge of everything else. What a life.
And it says in the last part of verse 6 that Joseph was a godly person and well-favored. Can you imagine that reputation? If we had that same reputation, that we are godly favored, that God favors us in everything we do.
Absolutely.
That's a tremendous accolade to Joseph. And
Yes, it is.
when you read about Joseph, there's nothing you find in Joseph is spoken more of than Abraham in Genesis. And there's no character flaw in Joseph's life that we see. But he must have had flaws because he died.
Yeah, he had a few flaws early on. He had a measure of pride that was probably a little too much and braggery. He could have calmed that down a good bit, but it seems now he has matured into, he has been humbled. He has been through humbling experiences. Now, I don't think God lets words in Scripture by accident. And so look carefully at verse 6. Potiphar left all that he owned in Joseph's care. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was but well built and handsome. I don't know what that means. I can't relate. So what does that mean?
Pleasing to the eye.
Pleasing to the eye, okay? He is handsome in form and appearance, another translation says. Another says, Joseph was a very handsome young man. What are we to hear from that?
She was lusting for him.
She was lusting after him. It is only used of 3 or 4 people, only in the Old Testament, these exact words. Joseph is one. King Saul is another. Absalom is another. I believe David is the 4th. Not sure about David, but I think he's the 4th. Very handsome. Handsome in form and appearance. Well built and handsome. That's the key word is handsome. What does God consider handsome?
His son.
His son, okay. Except he described him as having nothing particular to look at.
In your heart. In your heart.
Your heart?
Yeah, but Jesus wasn't handsome according to Isaiah. He
I'm
was
saying a different
Yeah.
type
He
of
was-
handsome.
Yeah.
Yeah, the inside.
What we're looking at.
The inside was handsome.
The inside was handsome, but the outside was ugly
Yep.
for a
There
purpose.
was no reason to draw him near to Jesus.
And understand,
Because they didn't want what happened to Joseph to happen to Jesus.
yeah, nothing
But he was tempted in all things.
nothing that is indicated here that Joseph is not wrong in being handsome. There's nothing wrong with that. That wasn't what was wrong. He was a man who has just about everything. He has fame, he has power, he has respect, he has trust. And Scripture doesn't waste words. She uses the direct approach. What does she say?
Sleep with
Lie with me.
Lie with me, and that doesn't mean tell a false truth.
This one says, come to bed with me.
Come to bed with me. Depending on your translation, but we get the idea, right? Look at beginning with verse 8. He refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? I like how it starts out, verse 8. Simply stated, he refused. If you forget everything else, remember those two words. He refused. How?
He flees.
He flees, he runs.
I think we're missing the mark here because you only see this passage here. But think about Judah. Judah gave up everything to sleep with a prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph is saying, I'm not going to do such a wicked act because that wicked act would be against my God. But Judah didn't. He did submit to the prostitute.
Okay.
And so here, without knowing that background of Judah, you would not understand why Joseph has said this.
Yeah, the answer to how is his loyalty to God.
Right.
That becomes clear. He is absolutely loyal to his God.
Mm-hmm.
How could I do this great evil and sin against God? Now, to be fair, he also says that about Potiphar. How can I commit this evil against Potiphar? But more so, how can I commit it against God?
Okay, he flees from her, but he also avoids her, so he doesn't give her that temptation.
Okay? Clarence Edward McCartney it's a very old book, but it's called Trials of Great Men in the Bible. And this is what he says about Joseph. He says, this is no ordinary temptation. Joseph was not a stone, a mummy, but a red-blooded young man in his late 20s. It was not one temptation or one day, but a repeated temptation. Sometimes we forget that. It does go on to say that this was happening day after day. Now, how could this red-blooded young man in his late 20s say no? Because he knew his life is an open book toward God. God sees everything that he's doing. And by now in his life, he's become dependent upon God. God has not only been blessing him, but he was dependent on God through all of the struggles and the trials and the rough circumstances. God has brought him through. He doesn't want to give up on God now.
Roddy, isn't it very interesting when you see what happened next, right? That she gets rid of all the men in the household to only leave Joseph coming in to do his business and her. And then she grabs his garment and he flees naked from the house, right? Because he doesn't want to commit that act.
Mm-hmm.
It is how subtle evil is. She couldn't get it the one way, so now she's going to do it the other way, and she's then going to accuse him of doing something he never did. Because there's no one else to defend and say, no, it was her that did this. She's got everyone else, so it's only a he, she said confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the husband's going to listen to the wife over the slave, right?
She refuses to take no for an answer. She is not going to be rejected. She is not going to be ignored. She presses after him day after day. We can't live in a bubble where we think temptation will come once, but it's going to leave and go away. That's not the way it works. Satan's going to keep after you. So it's not surprising that Potiphar's wife goes after Joseph with such relentless persistence. But when he refuses and rejects her, she does turn around. It's almost like the pendulum of a clock, one extreme to the other. Now, if I can't have you, then you're on my bad list. But let me go back to Bonhoeffer, and I've got this one on the screen. Oh, well, that's very tiny. Sorry about that. He says, in our members there is a slumbering inclination towards desire, which is both sudden and fierce. With irresistible power, desire seizes mastery over the flesh. All at once, a secret, smoldering fire is kindled. The lust, thus aroused, envelops the mind and will of man in deepest darkness. The powers of clear discrimination and of decision are taken from us. Okay, I can buy it as long as he's not saying I don't have a choice. I know it can be a very difficult choice.
God put that in us, though, he said that even after you had a child, the pain of that, you still go do it again. Because it's the power of
the draw, the attraction, the magnetism.
yes,
It's very strong.
It's a drive in us.
Okay. I guess I'm preferring the way James puts it, right? James chapter 1. He uses the fishing example, which I can better relate to. Let no one say when he's tempted, I'm being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone, but each one is tempted when he's carried away and enticed by his own lust. There is something within us, it's called lust, desire, and it is a very strong desire. Works like a magnet. We see the bait, James goes on to say. And Satan knows exactly which bait I like and which bait you like, and he uses that accordingly.
When it comes full grown, it's sin.
And when it becomes full grown, it becomes sin. When I take the bait, if you will. So Potiphar's wife is dropping the bait day after day after day. Joseph doesn't bite. He doesn't take it. He turns it down. He refuses it. That's incredible faith, commitment, discipline. It's also incredible desire, but it's desire for the right thing and not the wrong thing. He rebuffs her time and time again, refusing to yield. And I kept thinking of that song, Yield Not to Temptation. Until finally she sets a trap. He's coming into the house to do his work one day. He notices the house is quiet. There are no servants about. What a clear image. And what does he do when she grabs his coat? Say it again. Runs out of the house. He flees. Second time he's had to give up a coat.
It's not a coat that we think of like a coat today. It was a one-piece type thing. It was more like a what we would say a dress, right? And so when they tore it, it would just come, when they put on it, it would just come open and separate from the body, leaving the person naked underneath the clothes to run out. And that's what Joseph did. He ran out. She had the cloak, his garment, and he ran out with nothing on.
It's pretty hard to give in to temptation when you're running away from it, isn't it?
Very much so.
Flee temptation.
That's what he did.
Satan did the same thing to Jesus when he was tempting him he was hungry.
Mm-hmm.
He was fasting for, 40
Mhm.
days, and he was so hungry, and he tempted him the same way. But Jesus, by example, showed how we can escape.
Yes.
Joseph knew Pat was a man of faith and knew truth, and he knew he could see the evil
Yes,
he was doing.
absolutely.
How to escape it.
Jesus added in the quoting scripture part, which is, of course, excellent, but an excellent way to deal with temptation.
Well, he also went on to say, didn't he, Jesus, that even if you think of it, you've already committed it.
Yes,
And so there is a whole different aspect. It's not when sin is full blown, you do it. Jesus said, no, even before it becomes full blown, you thought of doing it, and that's where the sin is. You thought about doing that before you actually committed it.
Joseph runs out in the street. Potiphar's wife is left standing there, rejected, garment in her hands, and she is enraged. What's the old saying?
About a woman scorned.
Yeah.
Woman's gone.
Hell hath no fury.
Yeah, hell have no fury when a woman is scorned.
Every ounce of her lust has dissipated or transformed into fury. It is now fury. She's upset. She despises him now. Look down at verse 13. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I screamed. Okay, there's two he's in that text. One is Potiphar, the other is Joseph. She's blaming them both. Anybody but her. She blames her husband for bringing this Hebrew slave into the house, and she's blaming Joseph. He shouldn't have been so good looking, I guess. And now she wants revenge. So she has to build a case against him using a piece of circumstantial evidence, which is his robe. She calls all the other the servants, the men, and she lies to them. I read this and my heart goes out to Joseph, because I think, we keep reading he's in these precarious situations and he seemingly is innocent each time. I want God to reward him for doing the right thing, but what happens to Joseph?
Trial after trial after trial.
Trial after trial. In this case, he's going right to jail. However, I also thought about that, and I thought about Edersheim saying, if he's correct, Potiphar is the chief executioner. I think, well, wait a minute. Why didn't he die?
Because God's with him.
Because God's with him, one. I think also Potiphar doesn't believe his wife. I'm guessing this is not the first time. I'm guessing she's got a reputation.
And I'm guessing because he's trying to protect the wife and his reputation of his wife, he does what he does.
Maybe. All of this is assuming things, but if he really is that powerful, I think Joseph would be dead if he believed his wife. Joseph is innocent. Circumstances are against him.
But I do also think that because he's seen that God is with Joseph, that he's very careful not to do something that could come back on him if God is with this man.
Sure, that's always a possibility.
Because that could be in his mindset, right? Because he's gained wealth, he's gained lots of things because of Joseph's leadership in his home. And so if he did something drastic, he may in the back of his mind feel, well, God's going to do something to me.
Okay?
So he does the protective measure.
The text says he is put into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Okay, put yourself in Joseph's shoes. What's going through your mind? I mean, it's almost like you did something great for God. You sacrificed, and you did something great, and on the way home you had a flat tire. God, where are you? Why? Why this? Joseph is incarcerated. He's innocent. He has resisted blatant temptation over and over and over again. But somehow in the midst of all this unfair circumstances, Joseph still knows that God's hand is with him. His faith is still in God. In fact, doesn't it specifically even say that? The Lord was with him?
Kind, yeah.
21.
Verse 21. Okay, so with about 10 minutes left or so, with temptation, let's think about the lessons we're learning here. And you may have some that I didn't think of. You're either dealing with temptation currently or you will. So keep this in mind. I have 3 things that I learned from this. Number 1, you must not be weakened by your situation. You cannot let your circumstances weaken your faith, whatever they are. Keep your faith in God strong. That's the main lesson that I learned from Joseph. He was incredible at keeping his faith strong. Number 2, you must not be deceived by the persuasion. Satan knows our weakness. He knows how to come at us. I don't think for a second this was not a real temptation to Joseph. It was. But he didn't let the persuasion get to him. He didn't let her convince him, this is good, this is right, this is what we should do, this is okay. And number 3, you must not be confused with the immediate results. Prison, in this case. It doesn't mean God is left. It doesn't mean God is not there. God is there. And Joseph is right where God wants him to be.
Yeah, and it tells us he was kind to him, but he was probably not thinking that was too kind. But maybe he wasn't killed because of it, but he got favoritism in the prison. But it's for us too. When we're going through hard times, maybe God's being kind to us, we just can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Roddy,
Mm-hmm.
no, we sit in a class, but sometimes when we get out in the world, something comes upon us and, well, we're just not sitting in a class.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was working at Ingersoll, they said, you're going to start taking on a whole project. You're going to do all the engineering, work with the engineers. You're going to take on the assembly here, and then you're going to go for 2 years and, take on the assembly at Ford, GM, or Chrysler. So anyway, that started. So one day I'm across the street in the main building, and I'm walking through the sales engineering place, and an old Canadian man, at that time, he was older than me, not now, but he says, young man, come here, I want to talk to you. So I walk over, and he says, I understand that you're going to Detroit to work on projects. And I said, yes, I am. He said, young man, there are women there that are not good, in certain senses. He said, you understand what I'm telling you? I said, well, I think so. So he said, I'm going to tell you something that's going to help you. It will help you when you're up there, help you to keep yourself a good person.
Mm-hmm.
He said, if you go to a gas station, a woman may approach you. He said, if you go to a hotel, a woman may approach you. He said, if you're walking down the street, a woman may approach you. So, he said, I'm going to tell you 3 things. Remember those, and you will do well. He said, if a woman approaches you, just tell her 3 things. I'm too old, I'm too tired, and I don't have any money. He said, the woman will turn around and walk off and never come back. He said, so as long as you go to Detroit, you will do well, you will be safe, and you'll be good.
Mm-hmm.
I've remembered that for probably 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
and it worked out. And the other thing is, when other guys came up to Detroit, I told them, look, Ingersoll's paying you a lot of money, don't lose your job, don't lose your marriage. Here's 3 things I'm going to tell you, and you'll be good. And it all worked out.
Sounds like wise counsel. Other thoughts on resisting temptation?
Just remember what's at stake, your eternity.
Yeah, remember what's at stake. Eternity is the primary thing.
I liked how you reminded us that Satan knows what your is and mine is and everybody's is.
Mm-hmm.
It's different, but just as powerful.
Temptation is not only for the opposite sex, but it's also money or possessions.
That's right.
You're tempted with those things also.
There are all kinds of temptations.
Power.
Yes.
I think the one thing that I look at, because we all are tempted, we say we're not, and we're liars to ourselves, but we are tempted in our lives, throughout our lives, even throughout the day we're tempted. We may not even realize it. It's when you submit to that temptation, there are consequences to that. You only have to read in what happened before Joseph, what happened to his family when they were tempted and they willfully went ahead with the temptation. Then there were problems in the world. And it's the same for our life. When we willfully give in to temptation, habitually, not once in a blue moon, but habitually, the habit of falling into temptation and doing it over and over again, there are consequences to that. Just like there are consequences where it says, do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as is the habit of some. Well, the habit is you're not going when the saints are meeting on a regular basis. That's your habit. And the Hebrew writer says, don't be like that. That is a temptation not to be with the saints, right? Especially on the Lord's Day. That's a temptation.
Okay.
Not to be there. I'd rather go play golf. I'd rather take my kids to the sports shows, the sports games they're going to. Right? No, don't get your kids involved. It means they're going to play on Sunday. My kids aren't going to play on Sunday. It's all about what is the priority. The temptation is there. How are you going to handle it? Because God says you have a way out. And we all have a way out. But we're human and we do fall.
Very good. Okay, bit of business to take care of. I will be gone next week to the Faulkner University lectureship. Steve, are you teaching? Do you know if you're going to do your own thing, or are you going to do Joseph in jail?
No, I'm going to do my own thing.
Okay. Steve will be teaching next week.
Practical verses.
Practical Bible verses.
In what West area, you were old.
Where is this lectureship?
Faulkner University,
Where's that?
Montgomery, Alabama.
Montgomery.
Where else?
I have no idea. I'm English. I don't know where these things are.
All right, so I will pick up with Joseph in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks. All right, thank you for coming to class this morning.